Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Bob Hieronymus, and our executive producer and research assistant Laura Kortner, and our engineer is the legendary Sean Roman. And you're listening to One World from Oneida Elder Joanne Shenandoah with harpist Bambi Niles. Where was Jesus for the first 30 years of his life? I wondered that for decades. Yes. Where and what was he taught? And who were his teachers? Well, based on new information, culled from the hard-to-find Vatican texts, Theosophical Classics, Legends, and Hermetic Symbolism, Tricia McCannon constructs a radical new picture of Jesus and his times. She asserts that Jesus spent at least 7 years in Egypt, a number of years in England, and visited both India and Tibet before beginning his public ministry in Palestine. Now, this is a wide-ranging examination of the direct links and similarities between Jesus' teachings and those of a variety of mystery religions and sects that were popular during his lifetime, including the Essenes, the Buddhists, and Druids. McCannon offers compelling evidence that places Jesus' life and mission firmly in the context of the profound spiritual teachings that came before him. Drawing on records from the Vatican, Tibet, India, and Egypt, along with Greek, Aramaic, and Pali texts, as well as oral traditions of Jesus' teachings, McCannon uncovers the real reason that he has remained such a powerful and pivotal figure in world consciousness for over 2 millennia. Tricia McCannon is a renowned clairvoyant teacher and mystical symbologist. She is the author of 2 books, Dialogues with the Angels and Jesus, the Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years and the Ancient Mystery Religions. She has been a featured speaker at conferences in the U.S., England, and Europe, and has appeared on radio and TV shows including Coast to Coast, AM, Whitley Strieber's Dreamland, and the director of the Phoenix Fire Lodge Mystery School. She lives in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome back to 21st Century Radio, Tricia.
Oh, hi, Bob. What a pleasure it is to be with everybody on this day.
Well, I am pretty excited about this book because it unravels a lot of mysteries that we have been poking at for about 30 years. And 30.
Yes, it does indeed. And, you know, I think the life of Jesus is one of the greatest mysteries of, you know, really of the ages. And these last 2,000 years there have been a lot of people who've really sought to understand it and to decode it. But as we know, in the New Testament, there's a whole lot of open space. You know, we kind of only know, like, of the nativity and his birth, and then that whole incident when he's 12 years old and gets to go to the temple, and then there's big space, big space. And then we have the stories from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John about when his ministry begins. And so, as you know, and I wanted to mention to you, I know we're going to be primarily talking about Jesus, but I have to send you an updated bio because, as you may or may not remember, I had a third book come out.
Well, that was my next question.
Coming out in the fall with one of your wonderful books and your wife's book. So the third book is called The Return of the Divine Sophia, Healing the Earth Through the Lost Wisdom Teachings of Jesus, Isis, and Mary Magdalene. So that one has at least 5 chapters on Jesus' hidden teachings and so forth. So it's also very relevant to what we're doing today on Easter Sunday. And then the one that's coming out in the fall with Inner Traditions, which is your wife's publisher as well as mine, is called The Angelic Origins of the Soul, Discovering Your Divine Purpose. And so, you know, they're all linked together because I definitely consider myself a mystical Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of want to just put that out there right away because, you know, when we say a radical reinterpretation and so forth, you know, I think it's very important for people to understand that there are so many people who have read this book the last 2 or 3 years since it's been out, and I get letters and emails and phone calls from people all the time, people who are like, I never even liked Jesus. I never even got Jesus. And they read this book, and they're like, I love him. He is great, because you get him at an entirely different level that's not just sort of what the church has told us with religion, which is, I think, a little confusing, because, we've got the Old Testament, which seems to be a God of blame and vengeance and punishment and threats, and then we have the New Testament God, which is a God of love and forgiveness and wholeness and kindness, and, the kingdom is within. And for a lot of people in the Judeo-Christian world, I think it's very difficult to kind of reconcile these two pictures. And so I think that these two books about Jesus and then the Divine Sophia really address how to come to terms and reconcile what's going on with some of our religious literature and how to put it in the right context historically and to fill in the blanks along the way.
Well, you are an enormously busy person. Tell us where you've just been. What have you been up to?
Well, I just came from New York. I was up in New York speaking actually at the ARE, or the Association for, it's the Edgar Cayce Center, basically. I think it's the Association for Research and Enlightenment. But, their headquarters is in Virginia Beach, and I was very honored to go up and speak in New York at the center. I did a whole program actually on Atlantis and all this amazing evidence that they're finding. In the last 200 years, we've discovered over 500 lost or hidden cities, many of them underwater, enormous pyramids, off the coast of Okinawa, Japan, and Yogaguni, which was probably part of Lemuria, and whoever was living there, they were obviously giants, because you'd have to be a giant to take the steps up the pyramids that size. And then we kind of made our way over and looking at, of course, the island of Santorini, or Thera, which is, in the Mediterranean or the Aegean. Then we made our way over to the coast of Spain and Portugal, taking a look at these pyramids that they found underwater near the Azores, which are just absolutely beautiful islands. And also ruins they found inside the Straits of Gibraltar. And, of course, we know from Plato that Atlantis was outside the Straits of Gibraltar. So these may be people that survived and moved inland and kind of tried to recreate their culture, but there's an incredible underwater park there that's like temples with Athena, and, just like what you'd imagine Atlantis would look like. And then we went all the way over to the Bahamas and the Caribbean and Havana, Cuba, where they found incredible ruins. So I'm going to be speaking on Atlantis, actually, in Los Angeles, in Venice Beach, and Irvine, California, in May. And then I'll probably be doing a tour in July around Atlantis and these lost civilizations up the West Coast in Mount Shasta and Eugene and Ashland and Oregon, Portland, Oregon, and Seattle and Vancouver later in July. And I'm just getting all that stuff. It's not up on my website yet. It will be probably sometime next week. I'm just getting where the locations of the venues are and who to contact if someone's interested in more of that information.
Well, Tricia, throughout your book, Jesus, the Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years, you frequently write that you never intended to write this book, but you ended up writing it anyway. Why?
That is such a great question, Bob. Yeah, I live in Atlanta, and I grew up here in the Deep South, and maybe like a lot of people who are listening to this, there were certain things that I heard that didn't make sense to me. My dad was Baptist, so it was hellfire, brimstone, and damnation, and then my mom was Methodist, and then we wound up, going around to other churches trying to find a better fit for us, and something that wasn't so angry, basically, and fearful and scary. And we went to Presbyterian and Lutheran, went to a bunch of churches, and they're all cool in different ways. But we settled on an Episcopalian church, and I was confirmed there when I was 13. And I definitely grew up in the church, and I loved Episcopalian. I consider it like Catholic light. You got all the cool stuff like the incense and the ceremony, but without the guilt and the shame and so forth. And so I had always thought Jesus was wonderful, but my older sister became a fundamentalist, and she married a fundamentalist preacher. So in the name of Jesus, I saw a lot of things being done just at the family level that were really off. and, judgment and blame and punishment and beating and whipping and all with Jesus' name attached to it. And so I really basically kind of had it. It's like, I'd had it crammed down my throat to the point that it was like, I really just forget it.
Sure.
If this is how it's going to look in religion, there's something wrong with this picture. It doesn't, somehow this kind of judgment abuse that I saw associated with many religions, not just fundamentalist Christianity. You see it in the Muslim religion. You've seen it in some things in the Jewish religion. It didn't work for me. And so the last thing I ever intended to do was write a book on Jesus. But what happened for me was I went to college, Florida State University, and, then came out and became a commercial photographer. But as you know, I'm a clairvoyant, and I had seen angels since the time I was a little girl. I had been speaking with masters. When I was 19 years old, I had a group of masters called the Viragi appear to me and began to, they had a map to all the multidimensional levels of reality. They taught the ancient science of soul travel, which is the ability every one of us have to shift our consciousness to where we're able to travel beyond our physical body while we're still alive in the physical world into these higher realms and regions, so we don't have to just, wait to find out when we die. And so, I really had gone on to study Egyptian mysteries, Celtic mysteries, Native American mysteries, the ancient goddess teachings. Many traditions, and I really saw how they all worked together, from the Druids to the Essenes and so forth. And so I was writing a book really about the mysteries. And I had put into the book 3 little chapters on Jesus, because I happen to think Jesus is very important. I love his message, that love is the answer and forgiveness is the key, and that the kingdom of heaven's within, and judge not lest ye be judged. And so, we reap what we sow. So many things he said really resonated with me. And so before I knew it, I had 200 pages inside of what was now a 600-page book.
Oh, we got to take a break. We're going to take a break here with our guest, Tricia McCannon. And the book we're going to discuss this evening is Jesus, the Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years and the Ancient Mystery Religions. Now, let me tell you, this is a multiple genius that's put this together. And that's one of the reasons why it goes, so deep and uses quality references which really make the difference, as far as I'm concerned, about believability. We'll be back with our guest in just a few minutes.
This is Elaine Pagels, author of the Gnostic Gospels, and also of a new book called Revelations, Visions, Prophecy, and Politics in the Book of Revelation. I'm a professor of religion at Princeton University, and you are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hurana.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. Our guest is Tricia McCannon. Jesus, the Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years and the Ancient Mystery Religions, Hampton Roads Publishing, 2010. You can visit Tricia's website for more info on her books and readings and talks. That's Tricia McCannon, McCannon.com, TriciaMcCannon.com. This is one of the most important books that has been written about this field to date. And I think it has a great deal more credibility than most other books that have come out and made some rash statements without backing them up. I'm so glad that your dad taught you all about documentation, because you gotta. We're standing on the shoulders of each other, and if we don't give our references, have them being accurate, then it's going to mess up future researchers. No two ways about it. And that happens a lot.
Well, my dad was a lawyer. He was the county attorney of one of the 5 Atlanta counties. Very brilliant man. And my mother was a real estate broker. My family's pretty traditional Christian. And so for me to be a clairvoyant and for me to be into the mysteries and all of that, of course, I've always had to sort of reconcile Christianity and my Judeo-Christian roots with, all this mysticism and Hermeticism and the masters and the angels and the clairvoyant things that I've seen since I was a child. The whole thing that we are really trying to transmit in our work, me and mine, you and yours, is what I would call gnosis. And gnosis is a direct vibrational transmission that transforms the person that's listening to it, just like by holding the frequency and the vibration in this radio show and listening to it. You can actually go into an altered state where you wound up getting a vibrational transmission from the masters that work with me, the angelics that work with me, with you, the divine Christ energy and the Sophia energy, and also the divinities, the great divinities that populate the universe. They're all working for, let's call it the big cheese. They're all working for the divine, for the one, Yeah. And it's really about the one and the many and the one. And this was one of the things I think that needs to sort of happen in our theologies now. For so many millennia, we understood that there was one behind it all, and then that one became the divine Father and Mother, the divine Daughter and Son, and then many other expressions, many other masters, sages, avatars, divinities, bodhisattvas, and so forth that all serve that divine one. And some of these, of course, we might call deities because they have big jobs to do in the cosmos and to do in the universe. And, of course, the book, The Divine Sophia, was all for me about the discovery of the Divine Mother, the face of the Divine Feminine that has been left out of the Judeo-Christian world to a large degree. She's down there. You have to really look through the manure to find her. In the Jewish tradition, she was Sophia, the mother of wisdom. And, of course, in Christianity, we inherited her as the very human mother of compassion, Mary. And now, of course, Mary Magdalene is starting to come out from the 1,500 years of slander that the Catholic Church kind of laid on her with Pope Gregory in the 500s A.D., or, of our Common Era. And that shadow, of course, as we know, is painted Mary Magdalene as a prostitute for 1,500 years. Poor Mary Magdalene.
I know. Just
master initiate, incredible female Christed being, and she got painted as the fallen woman. I mean, isn't that crazy?
Well, it is, and we'll touch on that a little later on. Let's get to the Divine Feminine. Why is the Divine Feminine so important, and why is it needed to bring us into balance?
Wow, great questions. Well, first off, when we talk cosmology, we can talk from the bottom up or we can talk from the top down. But from the bottom up, the simple answers are we are both male and female. The universe is male and female. We can look around and see all the animals are male and female. And it's the unity and the balance and equality of the two that bring creation into being. So when you have a masculine dominant society like we've had for, about 3,000 years, what you have is war, 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 and more war. It's an addiction to competition, to suppression, to violence, to all the things we see on TV, the suppression of women, mutilation, no voting rights. People dictating, suppressing one gender. Now, we could flip it. It would not be any more honest or true or good if it was women suppressing men. Mm-hmm. Because it takes them both in equality and partnership. And this is, of course, how the universe was birthed. In fact, in the ancient world, because everybody could look around and see that the only thing that gave birth was the female gender, they believed that who gave birth to the universe was, in fact, the Divine Mother, that behind all of it was this eternal virgin that needed no one or nothing other than herself to begin the process of giving birth. And when she did, she split herself in two to become the Divine Father and Mother. The two expressions, which are will and power and wisdom, the Divine Father, and love and compassion and wisdom, the Divine Mother. Of course, what's happened in our society is the reason our society is sick, in my opinion, is because somewhere along the way we suppressed the divine mother and the divine daughter. And so we cease to claim that within ourselves. And, we made up this story that heaven is up and hell is down. So by association, the earth is part of hell. So we should just desecrate it because who cares? And spirit doesn't exist, inside of matter, that we have the right in this patriarchal society to go kill every man, woman, chicken, pig, and goat.
Yeah, everything. That's right.
Make a profit out of it, whether we sell it in sexual slavery, whether we make our bacon out of it and torture the pig or the cows or whatever the animals are that we're using to torture. So, I mean, there are just so many abuses of this paradigm.
You never intended to write this book. Jesus, the explosive story of the 30 lost years, you ended up writing it anyway.
And so before I knew it, I had 200 pages inside of what was now a 600-page book, which the publishers aren't going to like a 600-page book.
No, they don't.
For them, that's 3 200-page books.
Yeah.
So I thought, what am I going to do? I just don't know. So I decided, I know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to take out the section on Jesus, and that's going to solve my space problem. So it was the week after Christmas. Everything was very quiet, that kind of like deep cave time we go into after everyone has run around in the flurry of Christmas and holidays. And so I was laying on the floor of my office. I had just made that decision, and I had my hand over my eyes, and I became aware of this bright light shining down on me. And I moved my arm, and there, standing in the room with me, not 12 feet away, was Jesus in his golden light body. And he was I'd say about 6'1". He was, he had, that kind of the wavy hair to the shoulder like you expect. He had the gray, blue eyes. He was radiant, and his energy just pierced my heart. His presence is so strong, it just totally expands your heart. And without any preamble, he said, I want you to write a book about my lost years and secret teachings. There has been enough war and bloodshed in my name. And I tell you, Bob, it was like an arrow pierced my heart. And I was just so in amazement. When I could even gather my thoughts, I think I thought, well, can I finish this other book because I'm running out of money? I mean, aren't we funny? We're just so mundane and human.
I know.
And he smiled and he waved his hand and he said, don't worry, it'll just take a moment. I'll open every door. And, of course, it took 3 years. I wound up remortgaging my house twice to pay my bills. But I guess in the mind of God, 3 years is not even a blink of an eye. And, in fact, he did open every door. I wound up with a wonderful agent and a wonderful publisher. And it was quite a journey. It really did take 3 years. And because I'm I was a commercial photographer and I'm a clairvoyant, I process everything visually. And as a clairvoyant, when I read for people's soul records on the time track, I see everything like a movie. And so I wound up putting together a profound series of DVD PowerPoint presentations on the Egyptian mysteries, the Jewish mysteries, and the Christian mysteries. And I started the book 6 months later. And from that point on, there was miracle after miracle. I had people who would show up at my house with hidden text that Joseph of Arimathea had brought to England in 37 A.D. when he set up the very first, Christian community. I had books materialized on my shelf. I had this missionary who came to see me who brought me some of his secret books that he had spent a lifetime. He and his father were both missionaries collecting. I had been to the Vatican. I wound up getting access to some of the hidden teachings within the Vatican that most people don't know about. It was an extraordinary journey, and Jesus was in my house really day and night. About 3 months into working on this book, I had these friends come and visit me. It was probably the end of August, and I had started in the beginning of June. And they brought this little 5-year-old girl with them, a Mayan girl that they had adopted. They had been living in Central America. They were from L.A. originally. And they stayed in my house, and she slept in the bed, the guest room, and I had been sleeping in the guest room because it was about 10 feet from my computer. It was like one of those Jack and Jill two bedrooms with a bathroom in between, and they were waking me up at all times of the day and night. And so she, of course, we didn't even talk about what I was doing because my friend was a radio announcer and he had a lot of other cool stuff going on with him. So the next morning we went to go to breakfast, and I had gotten this beautiful little teddy bear for this little girl, and I gave her the bear, and I said, now you can name this bear anything you want. And she said, Issa. And I said, oh, you mean Alyssa? Thinking, didn't compute. She shook her head. She said, no, Issa. I said, you mean Eliza, Elizabeth? And she shook her head. She said, no, Issa. Well, Issa is the name Jesus called himself when he went to all these different lands. That's why the Egyptian Christian church, a Coptic church of Issa. In India, he was known as Issa. In the Druid lands, he was known as Issa. In Ireland and England and Scotland, Issa, Lord Issa. And he had come to visit me, obviously, that night, as he had every night, to download what he wanted me to do with his book. And the little girl was in the room, and she was psychic enough to have picked up on his presence. And that's why she wanted to name this bear Issa. And so the whole process of writing, it was miraculous. I travel and teach and speak everywhere, in Europe and in America, and I couldn't leave my house. I was like handcuffed by spirit to the computer in the process of writing this book. And as you know, it has over 100 illustrations, over 1,200 footnotes, and it's a tour de force of the great spiritual mysteries and where he traveled and what they taught, and how what they taught is also reflected in his teachings. And then because he had asked me to write a book about his lost years and secret teachings, although there's some secret teachings in the Jesus book, of course, I had about 200 pages I had to pull out of that book. And so that 200 pages wound up in the book, The Return of the Divine Sophia, which was the next book that I wrote, Healing the Earth Through the Lost Wisdom Teachings of Jesus, Isis, and Mary Magdalene, where we begin to take a look at how Jesus understood that the masculine and feminine had gotten out of balance in the world, and how important it was to bring it back into balance. So he called God the Abba Father, Amma God, the Father Mother God, or the Mother Father God. And he said that there's a divine Father Mother, and there's also a divine Daughter and Son, and that periodically they come to earth to help humanity, even as I and Mary Magdalene have come to earth. Now, he also said that he cannot return until the divine feminine is re-enthroned in the world.
Oh, my.
So, of course, those people the patriarchy who's in power, I think that they want to hold on to their power. So it behooved them to basically, minimize Mary Magdalene's role, turn her into a prostitute, which she certainly was not. She was actually put in charge of the inner teachings of the church, the Christian church, where Peter was put in charge of the outer teachings. And this is, of course, how all the great mystery schools were across the world. There was an exoteric or outer school that taught moral principles like the Ten Commandments. And then there was an inner school that really taught the inner spiritual connection. So Peter was the outer, the rock, and Mary Magdalene, or Mary the Magdala, Mary the Great, was meant to teach the inner. And actually, this is one of the things that I discovered through my research, was that for many years after the crucifixion, after Joseph of Arimathea and Mary Magdalene, Mary Salome, Mary Jacobi, Mary the Mother, and some of the disciples fled to the south of France and then made their way finally up to Britain and settled in Britain, although some were left, like Lazarus in France as the first bishop, I think, of the church. I discovered that every 3 years there were conclaves on the Isle of Cyprus where Mary Magdalene would come and teach, and Christians from all around in that area would come for like 2 weeks. And she would teach in the morning, and then it would be open for discussion and understanding, and people to, put in what their thoughts were in the course of the afternoon. And, of course, we've lost all this in our human history. And the early Gnostics believed that Mary Magdalene was actually an incarnation of the divine Sophia, or the divine mother-daughter principle. And she had over 250 of her own wisdom sayings that they collected that are just as profound as what Jesus had to say and totally in line with what Jesus had to say. So, it's been quite a journey to be in the energy of these beings, because not only were all these masters coming to see me during those 3 years, but then when I began to work on the Sophia book, I had all these aspects of the divine feminine coming in. And as you know, I'm an artist, and I did about 100 illustrations for each one of these books. And as I would draw, the presences of those divine aspects of the divine father or mother or daughter or son would come and kind of work through my hand while I was in the process of drawing, for 4 or 6 hours, and then they would move off. And I'm sure they improved the drawing, because even though I was an art major in college, I kind of went to photography and video and production, so I was a little rusty. And I'm sure they really helped to inspire that work. So, it's so interesting how these beings are still alive in the spirit world, and how we can interact with them if our heart is pure and our consciousness is pure.
Well, boy, way to go. That really condensed an enormous amount of knowledge and information in just a matter of 10 minutes. That was really great. Now, we got to take a break here. When we return, as you said, we lost his teachings, because, well, you didn't note this, but you noted in the book, they were purposely destroyed. It's not that people were lazy and couldn't find them and stuck them somewhere and then couldn't remember where, but but they were destroyed intentionally.
So cute. Yeah, you're right. They did everything they could. They literally sent out teams to destroy them. And
correct.
Fortunately, from the Al-Qamadi text and the Dead Sea Scrolls from 1945 and 1947, that's when they were discovered. We have some of that has been preserved by the Essenes, thank goodness. So I know you need to go to a break, so
yeah.
I look forward to you talking on the other side.
Well, when we come back, I'm going to ask you about, this is one of the other great pluses about your book, the information on the ancient mysteries and the Great White Brotherhood. Now, this is really key as far as I'm concerned. Most people ignore it, and that's a big mistake. We'll be back with our guest, Tricia McCannon. Jesus, the explosive story of the 30 lost years in the ancient mystery religions, Hampton Roads Publishing in 2010. Visit Tricia's website for more information on her books and readings and talks. Tricia McCannon, McCannon.com.
Hello, I'm Michael Bastine, co-author of Iroquois Supernatural, and you are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hieronymus. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and we hope you enjoy all the work that we're doing for the people.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio with our guest Tricia McCannon. Of course, I knew you knew the name of this book, right? The Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years and the Ancient Mystery Religions, Hampton Roads. Well, I know that my listeners know this. I one time was going to become a priest. I was very serious about it. Then I discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then I discovered the Gnostic teachings, and I realized somebody forgot a lot of history. And of course, it wasn't forgotten. It was just wiped out, and so were so many of the people that were involved in it. Let's see. Tricia, who is or are the Great White Brotherhood, and how are they connected and related to Jesus?
Wow. Well, we all know the story of the three magi that came to visit him at his birth. And, of course, the term magi comes from the words magician, and we think magicians, are, during the fundamentalist Christian era, we thought magicians were bad, but yet here are these three, kings or three magi whether they were kings of countries or they were kings, spiritual kings, masters, basically, that came to honor him. And we know they were astrologers and astronomers because they were following some star, the Star of Bethlehem. Now, whether that was a UFO, whether that was a astrological conjunction, I talk about at great length in my book.
You sure do.
I take a look at all the options, but we do know that there were actually independent reports of it. There's a report from Bethlehem, from the rabbi of that town, who basically said that it was like, this bright light came and shone down around the whole town, and it was like, like a big full moon, but even brighter. And they thought that the gods were coming back. I mean, everyone was trying to figure out what was happening. And, of course, that was the same kind of experience that the shepherds had, too, except that they were hearing this incredible celestial music coming down at the same time. So, what was your question? I'm sorry, I've gone down this whole Bethlehem path.
Well, we're at the Great White Brotherhood.
Oh, yeah, the Great White Brotherhood. Yes, the Magi. So the Great White Brotherhood is actually a group of spiritual masters that are both on this planet and off this planet, who are beings that have achieved enlightenment, spiritual enlightenment and oneness, and really wish to help humanity to move towards this enlightenment for each and every one of us. And so, they are people who have come down and gone through the same kind of suffering that many of us do. They've gone through hundreds of lifetimes, like many of us have gone through, and eventually achieved a level of high consciousness oneness with the divine. And they set up these great mystery schools that we know were going for at least 4,000 years before Jesus and over 400 years after Jesus, including some of the ones we know of in the Greek traditions, like Pythagoras' school and Plato's school, Aristotle, and then the Neoplatonists, that, all this is very well known in history. And, of course, the Neoplatonist schools combined the Christian wisdom and the teachings of Jesus with a lot of the wisdom that had come before in a beautiful marriage where they showed how Jesus was working within the laws of the universe, and that, it wasn't charlatanry. It was actually the fact that his consciousness was at such a high level that he could actually command the elements and so forth. And so all this, of course, was disbanded and destroyed by Constantine, by Theodosius. Around the Theodosian decrees came out around 394 something A.D. Or after Jesus, or we can call it CE for Common Era, however we want to refer to it. So the Great White Brotherhood had chapters all around the world. The Essenes were one of their chapters. And, of course, we know that Jesus studied with the Essenes from about the age of 8 till about the age of 13 when he had been bar mitzvahed. He was actually stationed in Mount Carmel, and that was up in Galilee. Galilee was in the northern part of Israel, and Jerusalem is in the southern part. And Mount Carmel, there was a school there, and that's the school that John the Baptist went to. It's the school Jesus went to. And there was a cave there called the Cave of Elijah, and that was the cave that Elijah had gone in to have his visions and so forth in the Old Testament. So it was a very, time-honored place, a holy place, so to speak. And this is where the Essenes had their school. And, of course, they had 9 separate centers. And most of us don't know where those centers were. Mount Carmel was one. But they worked, in the Trinity. So the Trinity cubed is 9 specific centers. And so Mary, the mother, and Joseph, the father, the Essenes, they were all Essenes. Joseph of Arimathea was an Essene. He was wealthy. He was a tin merchant, and he had about 5 ships, and he went back and forth up to Britain, to the Casterati Mountains, to mine tin. And tin was extremely important to the Romans because it was used in the making of bronze weapons. So without the tin, they couldn't combine the metals to make the swords that they used in battle.
Mm-hmm.
So Joseph of Arimathea actually had been given the honorary title of a decurion, which is a very high title within the Roman Empire, and it's because of his importance. And he was, wealthy. He was able to afford Jesus and Mary, his mother, the opportunity. After when they were little, they fled to Egypt. We all know this from the Bible. But then they came back after Herod, the Great, died when Jesus was about 7, and Joseph settled in Galilee, and Jesus and Mary went with Joseph of Arimathea up to the Celtic lands where he met the Druids for the first time, and they weathered over a whole season, fall and winter there, and then they came back in the spring. We have, historical reports of this. And then, of course, he was with the Essenes from 8 to about probably 13. We know he bar mitzvahed at 12. That's what that whole journey down to test the young men was that we read about in the Bible. And then, of course, he vanishes. But what happened then was he went up to the Celtic lands again, and he was with them for a year or two, but he was so advanced that they said send him on to India because he was already, such an enlightened being. And the Celts were another chapter of the Great White Brotherhood, and so were the Persians, where the Magi had come from. So were the Indians, the East Indians, let us say the Hindus and the Buddhists. So he trained with the Buddhists. He graduated from there about 19 or 20. He began teaching his own things, and he very quickly collected, 3,000, 5,000 people who showed up to hear him speak, and this, of course, threatened the caste system. There was a very strong caste system in India at the time, and the Brahmins held the reins of all the spiritual books. Those were passed down generationally, and then, the royalty, they got to hear the religious readings. The military got to hear it sometimes. The nobles got to hear it sometimes at certain, occasions. But like the peasants and the farmers never got to hear, and especially the untouchables, they never got to hear spiritual wisdom. Because, of course, if they couldn't spiritually evolve, then, they would continue to reincarnate in the same cycle and continue to be, the lower class citizens. Yeah. And the higher class wanted to maintain their position. So, again, it was, politics. And so I found 2 reports of assassins being sent to kill Jesus because they, he was teaching everybody, very democratic.
Yeah.
He looked at every soul as worthy, and this, of course, threatened the status quo. So there are 2 reports: one that the farmers and the peasants warned him, and one that the Magi reappeared and like soul travel and warned him. And so he fled to Rajagira, and Rajagira was a Buddhist community. And he lived there for 6 years, and he learned to speak and write and read the language of Pali, P-A-L-I. And he was accepted by the Buddhists as the second Buddha that the first Buddha had predicted would come 500 years after him. Mm-hmm. Buddha had predicted that a perfectly realized being would come 500 years after me. And Jesus could have just stayed there. He didn't have to leave and come back, but he was very aware that he had a mission, and so he chose to come back. And then I had track him through the Towert Pass along the Silk Road, where the Magi led him and met him, and he was trained in the Persian mysteries. And most of us don't know anything about these great mystery schools, but there was a group called the Sarmang Society, and this is a society that we only hear about in more modern times through the writings of Gurdjieff. But the Sarmang Society had a deep and powerful knowledge of the stars and the cycles of time, the cycles and the ages of human evolution and human consciousness. And they believed that they had discovered the existence of a being so powerful, basically a son of God, so powerful that he could insert himself into any age that he wished. And he usually would appear between the change of the ages. So in other words, between the age of Aries and the age of Pisces, which is when Jesus came, or between the age of Gemini and Taurus, which is when Mithra came, or now we're at the end of the age of Pisces, the beginning of the age of Aquarius. So now, or in the next 20 years or 50 years or 100 years, this being would be due to return. So they had been waiting on this being's return, and Jesus was recognized as that being. It was called the Saroshant. That's the term that they use for this being. And he was also known as the Aeon, A-I-O-N, who comes at the beginning of each eon, or 2160-year cycle. So these are all examples of the great spiritual mystery schools that had been set up thousands of years before by the great master Thoth. And, of course, Thoth was the god of wisdom in ancient Egypt. And Jesus, of course, was trained in these schools. And then, of course, he came back to Galilee when he was about 27. I have some reports of him there visiting Mary and Martha and Lazarus, who were like his best friends.
With that, we must pause at the top of the hour, and we'll return next hour with our guest, Tricia McCannon, Jesus, the Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years in the Ancient Mystery Religions, Hampton Roads Publishing, 2010. You can visit her website at Tricia McCannon, McCannon.com.